Some things happen without explanation. Some experiences haunt people for a lifetime. This is where I tell those mysteries. And remember, not everything can be explained. Story: the Chernobyl disaster was a cover-up of something terrifying. You probably heard about tourism in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. I've been there myself several times, and it's nothing like what you see in games or horror movies. There are no ghosts, mutants, or radioactive anomalies, and death isn't waiting for you at every corner. Actually, I think it's one of the most peaceful and prettiest places on Earth. An example of strength of nature and how it can reverse the damage that we caused it. Thus, when my friend Alexei decided to go there, he knew who to contact. He's a physics student, and right now he's doing some kind of research on nuclear fallout, and he said that he wanted to get some direct measurements and samples. But we both knew that it's just an excuse to go on an adventure. We visited the old power plant, the abandoned city Pripyat, and the surrounding exclusion zone. It was nice, but I would probably just bore you with more details. That part is not important anyway. We were driving on some dirt roads in a forest east of Pripyat when we found it. An old rusty fence and a chained gate that blocked any further passage. There was a big sign with a radiation hazard symbol and captioned, "Restricted area, authorized personnel only." There was a pair of massive metal blast doors in the side, an artificially looking hill not far behind the fence, with a large, white O13 painted on it, and "No entry" sprayed on top. "What do you think it is?" Alex asked. "I don't know. Looks like some kind of bunker," I replied. "And it looks like it has been closed for some time," I added after taking a closer look at the doors. The both halves were welded shut in the center. Alex took his samples and readings, but we were too puzzled to leave just yet. "Do you think we can get in?" I asked. "Well, not this way for sure. Even if it wasn't welded, sealed, I'm sure we have no way of unlocking it," Alex replied while examining the massive door. "It looks like an underground bunker. They must have had a way to pump air inside, and I don't think this is it. There has to be another way to get in," I said. We circled the main entrance to try find other means of entry. The day was already coming to an end, and it was slowly getting darker. As we were searching, a thought crossed my mind. Why would they weld the doors? What's so important inside that they went this far to keep people away? "Look, there's something there." Alex pulled me away from my thoughts. It was a concrete block a couple of meters large with what looked like vents on the sides. As I looked into the vents, I noticed that they were also sealed with heavy-looking steel hatches and no clear way to open them. However, there was also a somewhat smaller door labeled "Service Tunnel" with a large wheel on the outside. "Should I open it?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm really wonder what this is. Anyway, we don't have to go in. At least we'll see if the door still works." At first, the wheel wouldn't turn because of all the rust and dirt, but eventually it budged. The door unlocked. I pulled and it slowly started opening. It was very heavy and took a lot of force. Behind the door, there was a small platform and a tight vertical tunnel with a ladder. What caught my attention was that there was an identical locking mechanism on the inside. That meant that they could lock the door from both sides. But why? We were lucky, because if they had locked it from the inside too, there would be no way to get in. I stepped inside and shined my phone light down the shaft. It wasn't strong enough to hit the bottom. The air was damp and old, and there was something that I couldn't identify. A very faint, chemical-like smell. There was no radiation nor signs of any other hazards. "You've got to be kidding me, this is so cool. We have to come back here and check it out later," Alex said. I couldn't agree more. It was almost dark now, so we resealed the door and called it a day. But we promised ourselves to return. I immediately tried to do some research when I got home, unfortunately with no success. I even tried to call Pavel, a friend of mine who knew the area better than me. Actually, it was him who brought me there for the first time. He couldn't help me either, but promised to ask around. I told him about our plan and asked if he wouldn't go with us, but unfortunately, he was out of the country for a while. A week later, we packed our gear and went on with it. We brought some rope, heavy flashlights, glow sticks, Geiger counters, waterproof protective clothes, an oxygen meter, and a small emergency scuba tank just in case. And yeah, we're not stupid, so we told our relatives and friends about our trip and when we're expecting to return. We closed the door behind us as we descended down the access shaft. We couldn't know what's down there, and we didn't want to cause a radiation leak or something like that. We eventually dropped down into a concrete tunnel, which enclosed the air vents and some smaller pipes. There was obviously no power and thus no lights. Good thing we brought our own. We followed the tunnel and reached another door, but this time it was a regular one, not the heavy bunker type. We went through and entered a room with 4 large air pumps and some electrical equipment and controls. The ventilation shaft split here into 2 larger ones that ran straight into ground, and 2 smaller ones that went straight across the room where there was another set of doors. Behind the doors, there was a large hall with numerous boxes, crates, and other cargo just laying around. There also was a security checkpoint. Behind the checkpoint, we found the main door that we have seen from the outside. Just next to it, there was some heavy lifting equipment. We returned through the checkpoint and taken a look at a set of elevators. There was a simple map with the layout of the facility floor by floor. We were on floor 0, main entry hall. There were another 4 floors below us. Floor -1, offices, security, and recreation. Floor -2, secure laboratories. Floor -3, accelerator, clean room decontamination chamber. Floor -4, experiment site. The map was titled Object 13. It wasn't a military bunker. This was a research site. We took a set of stairs, since the elevators were of no use without power. An unsettling thought brushed my mind as we were descending. They probably were moving some supplies, and then left them there, and took the equipment to the main door. Were they trying to get out? I stepped on another stair step, but something rolled away under my foot, lost my balance, and fell on my back. My pack luckily absorbed the impact. I looked under my feet to see what caused my fall. Empty bullet casings. This wasn't the sole reason why I felt odd about this place. As soon as we got down to level -1, I noticed that every single door was open. Every single one. There was a canteen and a kitchen right at the beginning of a long rectangular corridor. Various offices surrounded the corridor. There was the regular stuff. Paperwork, old computers, personal belongings, all right there where they left it. Did they leave in a hurry? Dimitri, Alex called from the canteen on the opposite side of the corridor. What? Was all I could say when I followed him to the canteen. There was food still neatly served on the tables, but it wasn't spoiled. It wasn't fresh either, but it wasn't decaying, as a 30-year-old meal should. How is this possible, I asked. I don't know, maybe it was irradiated or something. But it's not anymore, I checked that. I really don't know, man, he answered, as puzzled as I was. Oh, why didn't we just turn back and leave? Now that I'm writing this, there were so many red flags already. Something really wrong happened down there. But I guess we were too excited and curious. But it was at this point that my excitement started to fade and be replaced with an eerie feeling. Nevertheless, we continued and descended down to level -2. The stairwell ended here, and to go deeper, we would have to cross the entire floor to reach another one on the opposite side. There was a security checkpoint and a large blast door that we had to pass through to reach the labs. Again, every door was wide open. However, the things that people left here weren't neatly placed where they should have been. It was a mess everywhere. There were all kinds of rooms with all kinds of equipment that I didn't understand. Occasionally, there were more empty bullet casings on the ground. There still was the one central rectangular corridor as above, but the rooms around it were like a little maze. Almost at the other side of the floor, we found the head scientist's office. As I said, everywhere it was a mess, but I found a logbook on the desk. There was only a handful of pages, the rest torn out. 5. October 1984. Today, we successfully managed to translocate several atoms without changes in any physical properties. It's going to be a long road until we can transport solid objects, but we're going some good work here. 17. January 1985. We've managed to transport an apple today. However, I couldn't help but notice that the pattern of red and green skin on top was slightly different. But it was still the same apple, with the same structure, shape, everything. We also tried to transport some electronics, They were unharmed and in working order. I think that we still have a lot to perfect and learn about this technology, but we cannot slow down now. The country is relying on us. 21. February 1985. After the animal trials, we translocated our first human today. He is alive and healthy, a brave hero of our nation. We have proven that this technology works now, but the practicality is still very limited due to the fixed translocation ratio. We still cannot send matter, only exchange the positions of two equally massive objects. I have proposed a new type of device that could possibly achieve one-way translocation of just a single object, but it would need an immense amount of energy. 1. May 1985, our superiors accepted my proposal. They are going to build a new, much bigger translocator here, in the power plant, so we can use a nuclear reactor as a direct power source. There is one more thing. We've now translocated dozens of test subjects. Each one is alive and well, but sometimes they are a little bit, well, different. They sometimes claim that various events in the past happened differently than they really did. Sometimes they claim to know people who don't exist, or more alarming, they know people who they are not supposed to know. The following was written below with a pencil by hand. Test subject 28 was speaking an unknown language and couldn't understand any real language after the experiment. There was a lot of missing pages afterwards. 25. April 1986. We are going to try to change our approach. It's been more than a year, and we're still unsuccessful in eliminating the translocation symmetry anomaly. We still don't know what is causing it, but we are not going to make any progress this way. Today, we are going to try to access the conduit reality instead. Even though Unit 2, the one we built in the power plant, is still new, we are going to use it for this experiment. Who knows what wonders are waiting for us on the other side? There was one last page in the logbook. On it, it was just a single phrase, written again and again. We let them in. Alex, I think we should go, I called. Man, come take a look at this, he answered. I stepped out of the lab and back into the hallway. There were clothes all over the corridor. Well, what was left of them? They were torn to shreds. No bodies, no blood, just strips of cloth and an occasional shoe or a watch. I looked up and stared down the dark corridor in front of us. I just stood there for a while. It was, I don't know, as if something torn all these people to shreds and then cleaned it all up, except the clothes and other non-organic material. A wave of pure, instinctive dread washed over me. I couldn't move. I didn't even breathe. Let's just get out of here, Alex said. We turned around and walked away. Slowly at first, but we quickened our pace. Our footsteps echoed across the underground structure. I just want to be out of here, man. We shouldn't have done this, Alex said. I didn't tell him about the logbook, but my thoughts were cut short after a sudden realization. His voice didn't echo. It was just our footsteps. I think he realized too, because we both stopped and listened. Nothing. Just silence. I stepped forward. Clack. I took another step. Clack. There was this door just in front of us, and I forced myself to try something. I closed it behind us as we passed it and placed a glass beaker that I found on the ground on top. I took a step forward. Silence. It was just echo after all, I thought. We walked away, carefully at first, but then we once again quickened our pace. We turned around a corner, and then it happened. Crash. The glass shattered. Someone, or something, just opened the door. We dropped all our gear except our lights and ran as fast as we could. I didn't even know I could run this fast. I always tried to be a tough guy, but I was never so scared in my life. Our footsteps didn't echo anymore. Or better said, they weren't in sync with ours anymore. Something was running after us. Each second it was getting closer and closer. As soon as we reached the security checkpoint, we started closing the door. The rusty joint of the door squealed in protest, but we pulled with all our strength. We almost had it closed when we heard a loud, guttural, and unnatural growl. The door slammed shut, and I threw the wheel to the locked position. My heart was pounding so hard that it was all I heard for a while. No, wait. It wasn't my heart. It was that thing, pounding on the locked blast door. We were running again. We reached the stairwell and run up, taking 2 to 3 steps at once. We finally reached the air pump room. The ascent really exhausted us, and even though I was scared shitless, I felt like I would pass out if I took another step forward. Besides, we locked it down there. Alex sat down and leaned his back on one of the large vertical vents with a bang. Bang, bang, bang. Oh fuck. We locked it down there, but we forgot the vents. Alex and I looked at each other, our eyes met, and then the vent burst and he was gone. I only heard him scream as he was dragged back down. I feel terrible for doing this, but I just ran. I climbed the service shaft and locked the service door shut when I was finally out of this hell. As soon as I had phone service again, my phone started beeping with loads and loads of missed calls and messages from Pavel. Hey, Dmitri, I found this guy. He says he knows what O13 is. Please pick up as soon as you can. He says it's dangerous and you should stay out of it. This guy is calling me now. He sounds serious. Please call me back at once. I don't know what's going on, but he's going there. Please, I hope you get this before you go down. Stay safe, friend. There was also one message from an unknown number. Dmitri, this is Anatoly Moros. I know what you found, and I'm on my way from Kiev now. Do not go down there. If you already did and you managed to get out, lock the door that you used to get in and make sure it stays locked. I will try to call you when I'm here. So here I am, writing this while I wait. I do this to make sure that no one else repeats our mistake, since I don't know if I'll live long to tell anyone personally. I just can't leave Alex behind. I have to go back. Fucking college kids. What does the sign at the fence say? No entry. What does this here say? He pointed at the text sprayed across the main door. No fucking entry. You think we just put these up because we don't have anything better to do? Like you? You really have nothing else to do but to snoop around things you have no business in? He sighed. Now look what happened. Look what you did. What your awesome idea brought you. Moroz yelled me after I finished explaining what happened. First thing he did when he arrived was to check the service tunnel and make sure it is closed. He didn't even talk to me. He just ran there and made sure it is sealed and locked. He was an average-looking guy, probably in his mid-50s, but I think people would say that he looked older than he really was. What is this place? I asked. You have no idea, he said, stood up and walked to his car. What are you doing? I'm going to save your friend, and you're coming with me. You will do everything exactly as I say, and nothing else. Stay quiet. Try not to exhaust yourself. The air is not circulating, and you'll burn all the oxygen and suffocate. You will stay tethered to me by this line. He lifted what looked like a small retractable winch. When I turn off my light, you will do the same immediately and you won't move. He continued and pulled out a shotgun from the car's trunk. Are these going to help? I asked. To an extent, but don't use it unless I tell you to, he said and handed me a pistol. Last thing, do you know how ozone smells? He asked and I nodded. Good. If you smell ozone, run. I started considering whether this was a good idea when he chained and locked the door from the inside with a massive padlock. This is the only way we can keep them from getting out, he said when he noticed me watching him. Hell, of course, this was a bad idea. Worst one I've ever had. So let me rephrase. I was contemplating whether I would ever see that padlock open ever again. Am I not going to get a key? I asked, watching him close it with a loud click. Sorry, I have just one. But don't worry, I'm right here, he said, sliding his hand across the line that we were connected through. The tether reeled back and forth between us as we walked through the service tunnel. It gave me some sense of security. I could be sure not to get lost and separated from the only other person nearby. It created a sort of a weird rhythm with the diesel fuel that sloshed around in the large canisters we carried. Our first stop would be the generator room on the other side of the main entry hall. The generator rattled and hummed as it slowly started spinning up. Did you see it? Morales asked. What? We have some time for talking until it turns on. Did you get a look at what took your friend when it happened? No, I answered. What is this place? I asked again. He stared into the air, sighed and explained. was originally a military stockpile in the 50s. In late 70s, it was then repurposed into a research site. Anything that was too crazy for public to know about it, they've done it here. And it was some fucked up stuff sometimes. Then, they had this project about teleportation. They even rebuilt half of the facility to house it. And that's when it all went to shit. How do you know all this? I asked. I used to work here, he said. So, what are these things? I asked. They are, he started but then brushed off. I don't know, I was just an assistant. Is there someone who knows? Not anymore. Everyone who knew, well, let's say they never left this place. And how did you get out? The engine clutch engaged with a click, and the generator finally came to life. I didn't. I took a sick day when it happened. The lights turned on for a brief moment and then shut down again as a circuit breaker popped. That's okay. We can't spare the power for the lights. We'll need it someplace else. You'll see, Miraz said. Whatever happened here, whatever killed all the people down here, and God knows how it was all connected with the Chernobyl disaster, he wasn't here. He took a sick day. He took a fucking sick day. Come on, kid, let's go. We were at the lab security checkpoint that me and Alex closed earlier during our escape. Remember, stay as quiet as you can now, Miraz told me, and we slowly opened the blast door. To our surprise, light blinded us immediately, something shining right at us. I took a step back while my eyes adjusted to the light, and then I finally saw the source of the light. Alexei's flashlight. I went to pick it up, but Miraz quickly stopped me with his arm and pointed into the blackness of the corridor in front of us. For a moment we stood there, silent, and then though I heard something in the distance. Miraz immediately turned off his headlamp and gestured to me to do the same, while he went to crouch in the corner. I followed and turned off my light too, but we were still lit up. Alex's light was still on, illuminating the room. Miraz quietly cursed, quickly went to grab the flashlight, and then it was dark. Completely pitch black dark. People say that when you're under stress, and you lose one of your senses, the other one's heightened to compensate. It's true. Or maybe it was just getting closer. It doesn't matter. I heard something drop to the ground with a muffled splat, then a few irregular footsteps. Not like footsteps of someone walking with a pair of shoes. It was like someone walking barefoot, flesh on concrete. And they were getting closer. I instinctively grabbed the gun Miraz gave me, hoping I wouldn't need to use it. It was now so close that I could hear a slow, raspy breathing. I think I even felt a cold breeze on my face. Inhale and exhale. In and out. I don't want to think about how close it was. Then something slammed into a wall down the way we came from, with a crash and the sound of glass and plastic breaking. Whatever thing was there with us turned and quickly followed it. I thought that it's gone and I'm safe. Out of nowhere, suddenly a hand brushed against me. I almost jumped and screamed, but the hand quickly moved and grabbed my mouth, preventing me from making a sound. Another hand grabbed my gun. It's me. Follow me. Slowly. A voice whispered into my ear. We entered a room on the side, and I heard a door close silently. We waited for a while, and then we turned our lights back on. Fuck, don't ever do that again, I told him. But he wasn't listening. He was looking at droplets of a thick, black fluid on the floor at the other side of the room. What? What is that? I asked. Blood. At least it was, once. Miraz answered and followed the trail. We traced it across a few rooms until we stopped in a large chemical lab. There was something on the ground, in a puddle of the black liquid. It was Alex's knife. There was some red liquid too. I could tell what it was without a doubt. Fresh blood. A trail of a few droplets went in the opposite direction than the black liquid. Look! He must have gotten away, I whispered. I doubt that. If we want to find him, we have to go to level -4. He just glanced at the knife and then acted like he didn't see anything. Look, this is his knife. They must have fought here, and he went that way. I pointed in the direction where the blood trail went. He must be hurt. That's one more reason for us to not waste time. Let's go. He stepped off back into the central corridor. I wanted to stay and search for Alex, but the tether that connected us wouldn't allow that, so I obliged and followed. Initially, Moros, please tell me what is going on. How do you know he's not here? Because I know. Just shut up. We don't have time to argue. We weren't whispering anymore. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me why you are so sure. I insisted. Because he's dead. What? But you said... Come on, let's go. This is not a place where we want to stay. We have to get down to level -4. Morose cut me off. Number, I trusted him at first, because he was the only one who could help me and help Alex. That was the only thing I focused my mind on, saving Alex. Only now I was realizing what I had gotten into, how blind and how stupid I was. He wasn't just an assistant as he claimed, and we weren't here to save Alex. I started unbuckling my end of the tether. What the fuck are you doing? He asked, raising his voice. I'm going out. Give me the key to the padlock, I demanded. Number, I can't do that, he said, with agitation in his voice. I had no choice. I raised my gun at him. Give me the key, I demanded again. You really think I would give you a working gun? You're not going anywhere, he said and pointed his shotgun at me. I pulled the trigger, but there was only a click. Fuck. Why are we here? Why didn't you call your friends, your superiors, or whatever to take care of this, but you have to hold me at gunpoint? Let's say we don't share the same goals anymore. But have no doubt, they are coming here, but not with guns, with concrete. They are going to seal this place up for good. And we have to be quick if we want to be out by the time that happens. Why can't you just please let me leave now? I asked, my voice shaking. Because it's a two-man job, he said and looked me in the eyes. There are things much more important than you, me, or your friend. I couldn't deny that. Maybe he was right, but I couldn't do this, and I didn't understand anything. Who are you? I asked him, returning his gaze. But then I looked away. Something caught my attention. Movement behind Moraz. It was a creature, crawling across the ceiling towards us. Its body vaguely looked like a human, but its skin was pale and stretched tight over its thin bones. Its veins were visible through the skin, filled with the same black fluid we found earlier. It had no hair and only holes where its nose and ears used to be. Its eyes were bloodshot, locked in a blank stare. We escaped it before, but our argument brought it back. It was too late to run now. Moraz noticed my stare, but he wasn't fast enough. The creature lunged at him. At the same time, he turned around and fired a shot, but missed, and the thing knocked him to the ground. That shot was deafening in such a tight space. I heard only ringing in my ears. My eyes were slightly blinded by the muzzle flash. In the confusion, I turned to run, but I forgot that I was still tethered to Moros. After the line was completely reeled out, it jammed, stopping me right in my track and sending me falling to the ground. I looked back and saw that the creature was now looking at me. Moros was lying there on the ground. I must have pulled it off him by yanking on the tether, and now it would come to make sure it won't happen again. I finally managed to disconnect the tether and threw the useless pistol at the creature, hitting its head. It briefly stumbled, and I ran to the only place that quickly came to my mind. I barricaded myself in a storage room adjacent to the large chem lab, blocked the door with a shelf. The creature spent a minute trying to get in, but then gave up and left, presumably to finish off Moros. And I stayed there, just sitting in the corner, too scared to do anything. I don't know how much time had passed, but it was starting to get hard to breathe. For a time, I thought I would just stay there and end it all, peacefully, instead of a violent death that was likely waiting for me at the other side of the door. But then, I heard a voice call my name. Alex's voice. Alex, is that you? I called back. Oh, thank God. I thought I would die here. You came back, he answered. I went to open the door, but then changed my mind. How did you find me? I asked. I was hiding too, but then I heard gunshots, and I came here to look. Dimitri, please come out. We have to get out of here. I sat down again. Maybe it was really him. But what if it wasn't? I didn't want to find out. No, he said you were dead. I saw blood too. No, it isn't you. It can't be. What? What are you talking about, Dimitri? One of those things got me pretty good, but I'm alive. Dimitri, just please come out and let's get out of here, he pleaded. I have decided. I wouldn't open the door. But then I changed my mind once again after what he said. Dimitri, do you remember the cherry tree? I knew you would come back. We used to play at this huge cherry tree when we were kids. We used to climb it all the time, but one day I had this idea to make a bet. Whoever gets the highest wins. I got almost to the top, but then I realized how bad an idea this was. The branches under me were too thin, and I knew they could break under my weight any time. But Alex didn't want to lose. He tried to climb even higher than me, and then the twig he was standing on broke and he fell. Luckily, he landed in a pile of fallen leaves and only broke his leg. He could have killed himself if he fell on solid ground, and it was my fault. I almost got him killed because of a stupid bet. We decided not to tell anyone how it happened because we were both afraid of getting into trouble, but I felt guilty for it for the rest of my life. There was no way how he could know about the cherry tree if it wasn't him. I opened the door and there he was. He looked terrible, bruises and scrapes all over, and he had a blood-stained torn piece of shirt wrapped around his left hand. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I've been better. Let's just get out of here," he replied. "That's not going to be that easy," I said. I told him what happened until now, and that the door was locked. Only Moros had the key, and he was either dead or gone. There were some tools and supplies up there, right? "Maybe we can find something to cut the chain," Alex said, and we decided to try it. It was better than searching for Moroz's key after all. We found his shotgun, stained with blood, both his and the creature's, and immediately felt safer. We also picked up our packs that we dropped earlier. Luckily, all of our gear was still there. We carefully walked back to the main hall, but I felt that something was watching us all along. We saw some few old saws and files next to the main door. We grabbed all we could, but we weren't alone. The inhabitants finally decided to make their move. One of the thin creatures crawled out of the stairwell. I aimed and fired. It fell down from the ceiling, twitching like a dying insect. But it didn't matter, because it wasn't alone. Another one crawled out, then another, and another. We ran to the air pump room and blocked the door by jamming a large saw between the handles. We worked quick, because we knew that it was only a matter of time until they got through, or come through the vents. Alex couldn't operate the shotgun with his hurt hand, so he offered to do the cutting while I stood guard, ready to kill anything that would come out of the vents. It was working, but it was too slow. Way too slow. Alex barely got through a few millimeters when I thought that the door would break already. They were pounding on it, slamming into it, and I saw it rattle in its hinges. I thought that they would get through any moment now, and then they stopped. I heard them run away. I coughed when a sharp odor hit my nose. "Fuck, what is that?" Alex asked. "Ozone," I answered. "Oh no, no, no," I said anxiously. I immediately realized that the odor was very similar to what we noticed when we entered the bunker for the first time, only much, much stronger. My Geiger counter started clicking too. "What's going on?" asked Alex. "That guy Moroz, he told me about this. He told me to run," I said. Just as he finished, the door shook in an enormous slam, sending dust flying in the air and slightly bending outwards. There was nowhere to run. We had a heavy steel door on one side, and God knows what on the other. I had no idea how we could survive. Luckily, Alex had. "Do you still have the rope?" he asked. Without hesitation, we tied it around one of the pumps. It wasn't easy at first, working with the rope with my hands shaking violently. But then another loud slam echoed through the room. One of the bolts that held the door was launched across the room. I felt a wave of cold run down my spine, and suddenly, I had just this one purpose: to tie the knot. Everything else just shut down in my head. I was done, and we dropped it down the broken vent that Alex got dragged into before. We stepped inside and started sliding down the rope. I then heard another slam, and then what I think was the door, hitting the ground. It was through. I slid faster, but the rope was starting to burn my hand. I lost the grip and fell down a few meters, landing on top of another vent. It broke, and I fell through inside another corridor. Alex then landed on top of me. It took us a few moments to get back to our feet. I looked around and saw an orange door titled Decontamination. We were on level 3. There was no handle, only a button on the wall next to it. I pressed it, and the door opened after a few seconds. We entered a small room with a control panel. Using it, I closed the door behind us. Several jets then blasted us with air. A green light popped up, and then another door in front of us opened, inviting us deeper into the facility. I noticed that the control panel was stained with a smudge of fresh blood. Was Miraz still alive and went through here? We couldn't go back. Our only option was to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. It was supposed to be a clean room, but the place was wrecked even more than the upper levels. After some walking and searching, we found a room that looked like a makeshift infirmary. A few dozens of beds separated with plastic curtains, some medical equipment. Some beds still had information clipboards attached. Patient 2. Quarantine. Survey Team C. Patient in coma. Observation only. Do not interfere. Deceased. 728. Unknown. Patient 6. Quarantine. Survey Team C. Patient in coma. Observation only. Do not interfere. Deceased. 752. Unknown. Patient 19. Quarantine. On-site operative assistant. First contact with Survey Team C. Massive blunt force trauma. Chest. Suspected internal damage. Cranial concussion. Suspected damage to cervical spine. Dislocated L shoulder fracture. L humerus multiple lacerations. Chest. Deceased. 404. Internal hemorrhage. Patient 7. Quarantine. Survey Team C. Patient is psychotic and unresponsive. Mild to moderate frostbite. Observation only. Do not interfere. Termination order. Signed, A. Morose. There were some body bags on the other side of the room. Empty. We searched the area and eventually ended up in the lower levels of the facility. There was this rotten smell all around. We entered a room and, well, there was this substance everywhere. On the walls, floor, ceiling, everywhere. It was like flesh, with tendrils or veins running across it, like from a Dead Space game. Then we found bodies attached to it. Dozens. Shriveled up like dead insects in a spider web. I think we should go back, Alex said anxiously. We turned around and went back, but then I heard some debris shift in the distance in the corridor we came from. Soon enough, one of these things crawled into the light emitted by my flashlight. It stood there for a while, staring at us with its blank eyes, and then it leaped forward. Then it fell to the ground, dead, and an empty shotgun shell did too soon after. I heard more of them making their way towards us in the distance, so we ran deeper into the facility. I shot a few more on the way, but then ran out of ammo. We eventually found a long, dark tunnel flooded with water. The things were almost on us. I could see them crawl along the walls behind us. We entered the tunnel. The water slowed us down considerably, and I awaited the worst, but then I noticed that we weren't followed. They wouldn't go inside the tunnel. We walked for, I don't know, an hour, 2? The water was ice cold. Luckily, it was only about knee-deep, so it wasn't too terrible. I already said that Alex didn't look well since I found him, but as we walked through, he seemed to be getting worse. He complained that his head hurt and he felt dizzy. His skin got pale, and he looked very weak. After some time, I had to support him, and later, he completely collapsed and fell unconscious. We couldn't go back, so my only option was to find a way to drag him through the water. It went like this for some time, but then I heard something far away in the direction we came from. A splash. I turned and shined my light into the black tunnel. Nothing. I went to continue walking, but then I heard it again. Hello? I called, hoping to hear an answer. Maybe Morose was here? Or did the creatures follow us after all? Nothing. I quickened my pace, but it wasn't easy dragging another person and moving through knee-deep water. The sounds continued. They weren't getting closer or farther, they were just there. Then I reached the end. The tunnel was closed off with another massive steel door and no visible way to open it. It was a dead end. I stopped moving and listened. Those sounds, it wasn't just a splash, it was more like as if someone or something was wading through the water. I panicked and started banging on the door, calling for help. I had nowhere to go. The sounds were now getting closer. I saw waves in the water. It was now very close. I slowly turned again and looked into the tunnel. I saw nothing and heard nothing, just silence and darkness, and then the familiar scent hit my nose. Ozone. Then I heard metal shift behind me, and the door opened. Dimitri? A familiar voice called. Morose. What? Who is? Oh no, you brought it here. He pulled me and Alex through the door, and then shut it again as fast as he could. That's your friend? How? What happened to him? He asked as he looked at still, unconscious Alex. I don't know. Are you okay? I asked back. He had a large gash across his face and his right eye. Well, no thanks to you, he responded. He noticed the makeshift bandage on Alex's arm and unwrapped it. What he had on his arm wasn't just a regular wound. It was a bite mark. That, Morose said and pointed at it. Stand back. He stood up and drawn his pistol. No, wait. At least tell me what's going on. He's going to be dead in a few minutes. This will make it easier. For him too. But mostly for us. What? Please. Is there really nothing else we can do? I pleaded. He looked at me, looked at Alex, and then stood there, thinking for a moment. I was immediately relieved when he holstered his gun again. Okay, this might help him, he said, and dug up a case with a syringe from his backpack. It looked used recently, and was only about half full with a clear liquid. He injected Alex with the rest of it. It won't matter anyway, he said. What do you mean? Follow me. Take him too if you want. I'm not carrying him. I guess you've probably already figured out that this all had something to do with the disaster 30 years ago, he explained as we moved through the facility. The first machine we used for the teleportation experiments, it wasn't powerful or reliable enough. We figured out that this whole thing wasn't as simple as it seemed. We weren't just teleporting one thing to a different place. We were transferring them between multiple parallel realities. But it was limited. We could only exchange two objects with equal mass between two identical places in two different realities. So, they built a new machine here and used a nuclear reactor to power it, hoping that we could possibly move anything to any place between two given realities. We started exploring whole new universes, saw worlds where the Germans won World War II, worlds where we all destroyed each other, even worlds where life never evolved on Earth. But then, someone had this idea. If there are these parallel universes, what is between them? There was only one way to know, and that's when it went wrong, as I said. We should have been happy with what we had, but we always want more, right? We tried to access this conduit reality, as they called it, but when they activated the machine, it stayed open. Something happened, and a portal was created, independent from our machine. It was sustaining itself. So, we sent a survey team in there. They came back after a few minutes, reporting all sorts of strange things. About how a strange feeling filled that place, how space and time themselves felt odd, even how some of them claimed to have seen themselves at different places at once. They wouldn't go back, even if threatened with all sorts of penalties. We sent a second survey team later. This one didn't come back at all, so we sent a third team to find them. They came back, but something wasn't right with them when they returned. Their minds were like, erased. I pictured the blank stares of the creatures we fought on the way. Shortly after they returned, a massive burst of energy flowed out from the portal straight up, into the reactor. But that wasn't all. And you know all this because you took a sick day, right? I asked. I was at a different place in the facility when it happened. I'll never forget when they came to me, saying that something came through into our world. What was it? I asked. I don't know. Nobody knows. It wasn't unlike anything we've ever seen, and it killed almost everyone here. Not just killed, it did stuff to people. You've seen. We're here. We entered a control room, filled with computers and various controls and displays. Moraz closed another blast door and sealed us inside the control. We need to close the portal. We have tried it before, but these things wouldn't let us. So where are they now? As soon as I heard that you went inside the facility and came back, I knew something was off. This place used to be full of them. At least one is still here, the smell of ozone. But a few years ago, anyone who went in wouldn't get alive past level -1. But we've got this far, and I don't know why. That's what scares me. Something isn't right. I know that I am asking for a lot, but we need to go inside the portal and use this." He emptied his backpack and took out a crude-looking contraption with all sorts of wires, coils, and other bits hanging from it. "We need to place one end in the other reality and then return with the second end into ours. If it works, it might cause the portal to collapse." "And how do you know that the same thing that happened to the third team won't happen to us too?" I asked. "That's the thing, I don't. But I'll tell you this. You know how they built that concrete shield over the reactor? They weren't trying to seal the reactor. They were trying to seal this place, to prevent whatever came into our world from getting out. And a few years ago, the thing we feared most happened. The shield started cracking. They were trying to get out. So, they built a new containment building recently, as you know. But for how long will this go on? Sooner or later, something will fail and they will get out. This might be our only chance to end this for good." How the hell did I get into this, I thought. I was just a random guy at the wrong place in the wrong time, but Moraz was talking as if the fate of our world depended on me. But maybe he was right. Whatever set of coincidences has brought me here. Maybe me and Moraz were the only people who could do what needed to be done. "All right, let's do it," I said. We put on a pair of what looked like modified spacesuits, left everything other than the device in the control room, and entered the machine. We were in a dome-shaped chamber full with complicated machinery. In the center, there was a sphere of white light. Above it, a black, hollow shaft going straight up with cracks and debris around the opening. We tethered ourselves to a steel rail, and Moraz walked forward, into the sphere, and vanished. After some hesitation, I did the same. I found myself in a place that I can't describe. There was no up or down, and I could walk in any direction. It looked empty, yet I could see countless infinitely large shapes, with billions of tiny shiny dots on the surface. "Here," a voice called. I looked for Moraz, but I couldn't find him. "Where are you?" I called. "Come," he said, and grabbed me by the arm, seemingly out of nowhere. I noticed hundreds or thousands of other white spheres in the distance around us. "Are those?" "Yes, portals from other parallel realities." "Are we going to close them all?" "No, just ours. The others are not our problem. They will have to find their own way to handle it." We walked towards one distinct shape. As with everything here, I struggled to describe it. It was like a fractal, the same shape repeating over and over and over again. "I think this is it," Moraz said, and started doing something with the device. It beeped several times, and then started making a high-pitched hum. "Oh no, this isn't good," he continued. "What's going on?" "Listen, I need you to take the other end and return. Once you're back, pull this switch and keep this button pressed until it activates. I have to stay here." I picked up my end of the machine and watched as a wire started unreeling between the two. "What about the key to the door out?" I asked. "There is no key." "What? But you said that wasn't the plan." "This was always the plan. I couldn't risk—" He didn't finish. I saw something in the corner of my eye. Movement. "Shit, don't look at it. Go now, run," Moraz said. And I listened. I ran back, followed the line back into our portal, with my eyes almost closed. I went through, placed the device on the ground, flipped the switch, and the device started producing a similar high-pitched noise. I pushed the button. For a second or two, nothing happened. And then, suddenly the device, or the portal, let out an ear-piercing whine, an intense flash, and a wave of heat. And then, it was gone. Severed wires and tether line laid there on the ground, where the portal used to be. In the meantime, Alex woke up. He looked much better, and I told him what happened while he was out. We didn't know what to do now. We thought about going back, and trying to cut the chain on the door outside again, but after what happened last time, we doubted that it could work. We probably wouldn't even get there alive at all. But then, Alex had this idea. What if we can use the machine to teleport out of here? It took us several hours to figure out how the controls worked. It was heavily damaged, and the reactor was obviously out of question, but the generators above supplied enough power for a simple translocation as they described it. All we needed to do is input a target vector. And then, the familiar clicking and smell of ozone came. A powerful slam shook the whole room and left a large dent in the steel door that connected the control room with the rest of the facility. "Fuck, not again," I yelled. I think I got it. They have some vectors written down here. We just need to add some height and we'll get above ground, Alex explained. Make it fast, I said as the door shook in another slam. He did something, and the controls lit up with alarms sounding. We ran to the core chamber and closed it behind us, just as we heard the control room door give way. We stood in the center and waited. Sparks and smoke filled the room as the machine did its thing. Please work. I heard another slam, and the door to the chamber broke off the wall and fell to the ground. I looked over and then the time froze. I didn't feel fear. I felt at peace. I felt as if I was just a step away from understanding everything. I wanted to stay here, forever. A flash suddenly blinded me, and then I bumped Mew head into something. I opened my eyes and breathed in fresh air. We were laying upside down in a crater-like hole in the ground in a forest. We were out. We found our car after a few minutes. We saw several military helicopters fly in the opposite direction as we driven home. Alex checked in a hospital with a made-up story of an animal attack. He was okay in the end. We didn't talk about it again. It was over, and I know that our world was safe from whatever stayed at the other side of the portal. But when I finally returned home that day, I noticed that something wasn't right. The old cherry tree that we used to play at when we were kinds, it wasn't there. There was an apple tree instead. We've managed to transport an apple today. However, I couldn't help but notice that the pattern of red and green skin on top was slightly different. We were transferring them between multiple parallel realities. Portals from other parallel realities. Are we going to close them all? No, just ours. The others are not our problem. They will have to find their own way to handle it. I think I'm not in the reality that I lived in before. I think that when we teleported out, we ended up in a different one. I can't stop thinking about that the portal in this one might still be open. I think we aren't safe. Story. They paid me $5,000 to go through hell. It was the advertisement's outright simplicity that caught my attention. Revolutionize science. Earn $5,000. Call us now. I wish I could say I didn't know why I called them. I wish I could say it was some act of God or deception that drove me into their waiting arms. But that would be a lie. The truth is I called them because I needed the money. Because I had gotten laid off at the publishing company I worked at, and I was having trouble finding steady work. Because I was months behind on rent and facing my second eviction notice because I didn't want to be a failure. I called them for selfish reasons. Who are they? I'm not exactly sure. In retrospect, their obvious obfuscation of their identity should have been a red flag to me. But at the time, their request seemed too interesting. Their reward too vital for me to risk losing the chance to help them. My best guess is that they're a group of private researchers that are funded by some supercorporation. They must be. Otherwise, there was no way they would have been able to pay for the machine. They showed me the machine the first time I met with them. It was kept in a cavernous room in the basement of a 5-story office building. It was a work in progress at that time. They were still connecting pipes and soldering wires. But even in an unfinished state, it looked truly magnificent. Have you ever heard of a sensory deprivation chamber? I had. In fact, I had actually been inside one before when I was in college. Back then, I was on a real hippy-dippy spiritual journey. You know, meditating a lot, experimenting with psychedelic drugs, primarily magic mushrooms. At some point along that journey, I felt motivated to spend an hour of my life and $60 of my student loans inside a sensory deprivation chamber at a local spa. Your standard sensory deprivation chamber is a large metal tank filled with about a foot of salt water. You step in and float in the water, then someone, a spa attendant in my case, closes off the tank so it's completely dark. With your vision obscured and your body suspended in the water, it's supposed to feel like you no longer have your two primary senses. Depending on who you ask, this is supposed to be relaxing, enhance your creative process, allow you to reach higher consciousness, hallucinate, or maybe gain magic powers. My experience with the chamber in college was fairly lackluster. I remember that the water was too frigid and the salt made my skin itch. It was difficult to concentrate on meditating or channeling my inner chakra or whatever the spa had promised. Truthfully, I did always wonder what it would have been like to get in one of those things while tripping on some magic mushrooms, but I never had the opportunity. This sensory deprivation chamber didn't look anything like the one I used in college. This chamber looked like a vivisected suit of medieval armor strewn across a large metal table. Thousands of tubes and wires connected to the metal body, which was about 3 times larger than my own body. The head or helmet of the chamber was colossal and round, with a big brass pipe running out of its crown into the tiled floor beneath it. On the walls surrounding the chamber were 50 or 60 computer screens, 20 or so server boxes, and various iterations of medical equipment that I couldn't name if I tried. It dawns on me now that the utility bills and computers alone for the machine must have been many tens of times higher than the measly $5,000 they offered me, not to mention the salaries of the dozens of lab coat-clad scientists manning those computer screens. Again, perhaps this should have raised alarm bells, but I ignored it with the focused ignorance of a man who was on the brink of homelessness. The man who showed me the machine told me his name was Dr. Monison. He was a wrinkled, balding man with a clean shave and focused eyes of blue. When I saw him, he was always clad in blue scrubs and a clean white lab coat. Dr. Monison was the primary liaison for my involvement on this project. He explained the machine's purpose, brought me the necessary waivers, and answered all my questions. Questions like, "So what exactly am I supposed to do? We want you to remain in our sensory deprivation chamber for 3 days." I'm sure my expression betrayed my sense of shock. 3 days? Will that kill me? You probably would still be alive after 3 days in pure isolation, though you would likely become gravely ill and suffering from immense dehydration. Regardless, the machine will hydrate, feed, and otherwise sustain you during the experiment, so there is no risk of bodily harm. Dr. Monison went on to explain how the machine worked. In your standard deprivation chamber, the occupant is deprived of their sense of sight, feeling, and, to a lesser extent, hearing. This deprivation, this process of shutting the outside world out from the occupant's mind, decreases the burden on their brain. Thus, the occupant's mind is free to wander more freely, free to think more creatively, to undergo a deeper state of thinking, to meditate, and so on. But there is a problem with standard sensory deprivation chambers. Although the brain is freed from most external stimuli, the visual and auditory, the brain will continue to be burdened by internal stimuli. That is to say that the brain is still very aware of its own carrier, the human body. The brain will still react to the hunger and thirst of the vessel that carries it. It will still process both the need to and the action of urination and defecation. These internal interruptions go on, but the point is that standard sensory deprivation chambers cannot truly be said to deprive the occupant of their senses. This machine is not your standard sensory deprivation chamber. Even a cursory glance at the machine made clear what the doctor meant. The inside of the exoskeleton portion of the machine is lined with a soft rubber that will acclimate to maintain the exact temperature of human skin. The tubes and wires control and regulate a wide variety of bodily functions. Through these tubes, the body is automatically fed and hydrated. The unsavory functions of the body are handled with a catheter and another series of tubes. A respirator automates breathing and regulates saliva production. Even the body's natural sense of touch is completely removed while in the machine. This IV cord injects a numbing solution into the bloodstream that completely shuts off all feeling. The numbing agent is the most critical asset of our sensory deprivation process. The list went on and on. It became clear that they had truly accounted for everything, even for me. I was one of hundreds of applicants to be part of the experiment. For the first time in my life, I was the first-round draft pick. The scientists explained to me that I had been chosen for 3 reasons. Number 1, I had no prior history of mental or physical illness that would make my experience in the chamber subject to intervening variables. Their words, not mine. Number 2, my height and weight were close matches for the machine's original shape. Although the legs will have to be lengthened ever so slightly, you are by far the closest match to our initial design. And number 3, the most critical, there was nothing happening outside of that chamber that would lead to an early termination of the experiment. I had no significant other, no job, no living family members, not even a houseplant to take care of. They could breathe easy knowing that I would remain peacefully within their contraption for the entire length of the experiment. Number 3 was important to the scientists. They had specifically designed the machine to allow for 3 full days of isolation. If the machine's process had to be interrupted early, it would take them a month to reset the machine and run the experiment again. Unfortunately, reason number 3 also meant there was nobody to come looking for me. The intake process was long and detailed. I signed what felt like hundreds of liability waivers. I listened to warning after warning about the potential side effects. Although it is apparent that you have a clean bill of health, you should be aware the isolation process may be taxing on you. Our preliminary research suggests that disassociation, audio and visual hallucinations, depression, time dilation, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and other neuroses are potential effects. However, we believe such effects to be unlikely. They had given me several weeks to prepare for the experiment. My only requirement during that time was that I didn't substantially change my body weight or somehow develop bipolar disorder. Somehow, I managed. I spent those few weeks living normally, watching movies, applying for jobs, getting rejected for those jobs, and reading a few books. When the day came, I was nervous despite Dr. Monison's efforts to prepare me. The process will come in stages. At first, you may endure a mild state of stress. We anticipate that soon after, you will drift into a moderate state of euphoria for the remainder of the process. You will be signaled a few minutes before the experiment is over by a short audio cue. This way, you will emerge from your state of sensory deprivation slowly and be able to reacclimate without any risk of shock. He played the audio cue for me, which was a short musical clip of bells ringing. Then, with little ceremony or deliberation, I was asked to remove my clothing and climb inside the machine. As I lay down inside the exoskeleton, I felt the warm rubber against my bare skin. Even with the chamber still open, I was confined on all sides by the metal shell of the machine. Slowly, the researchers began to attach a score of medical devices to my body. I felt strangely calm through every prick of an IV, an uncomfortable insertion of a tube. But, as a respirator was placed on my face, I began to feel a foreboding sense of unease. As I felt my body being constricted and held in place, a single thought filled my mind. Oh God, what have I done? The researchers pushed the helmet of the exoskeleton inward on either side of my head, sealing off my ears. The world went quiet. A bead of sweat began to trickle down my sides. Then I heard a voice, seemingly broadcast from inside my own head. Hello, this is Dr. Monison. I am speaking to you via a small speaker contained within the helmet of the exoskeleton. Your vital signs indicate that you are beginning to panic. This is to be expected. Please do your best to relax while we finish preparing you. I promise that the process will become pleasurable soon enough. Somehow telling me to relax just made me more anxious. Before I could react, I felt the machine close around my body. Already the numbing agent that was being piped into my bloodstream was starting to take away control of my extremities. I tried to push against the machine but found that my arms wouldn't budge. I tried to scream, but the respirator held my tongue firmly in place. I was unable to move, unable to do anything. Except watch. I could still watch as researchers scrambled around me to check vitals and prepare the exoskeleton to finish closing. I could still watch as a giant analog timer appeared on a TV screen above me and began to broadcast a time. 00 to 00 hours. 1 minute and 0 seconds, until deprivation begins. I tried again to scream. I tried again to plead to be let out. I found myself unable to feel any part of my body. I strained my eyes to try and get someone's attention, but no one seemed to be looking at me. 00 to 00, hours 0 minutes, and 30 seconds, until deprivation begins. Had my tear ducts been operating, I would have begun crying. Without nothing else to do, I began to pray that this was a bad dream, to pray that I was home in bed and not in this chamber. 00 to 00, hours, 0 minutes, and 5 seconds, until deprivation begins. The last thing I saw was the face of Dr. Monison leaning over me, waving to me, saying something I couldn't quite understand, closing the exoskeleton's face over my own. 00 to 00, hours, 0 minutes and 0 seconds, until deprivation begins. And then everything went dark. If I had been in control of my own breathing, I would have begun hyperventilating immediately. I had never felt such a profound sense of darkness as in that moment. Unable to see even my own body, it was as if I had been extinguished from existence. My eyes swam in every direction in search of a single iota of light but found none. After a moment's consideration, I realized that I had now been in the machine for some time. I had no reference point for exactly how long. Without outside stimuli of any kind, my only mechanism of telling time was by counting individual seconds in my head. Yet time ticked on. I found myself alternating between obsessing about my imprisonment and finding myself adrift in my thoughts. I began to consider the state of my life, my recent unemployment, my lack of close friends. I felt a wave of depression come over me. Was my life really so meaningless that I could be snuffed out of existence for 3 days and no one could possibly care? I pondered the source of my isolation. I looked back to times I could have tried harder at my job. Images of friendships that I had let fall apart out of introversion and stagnation cascaded through my mind. And then I came across a thought in my head that, were my body not numb to the point of immobility, would have made me burst out into laughter. I felt lonely. Well, of course, I felt lonely. I was, at that moment, the most alone human being there had ever been. Surely there were researchers only a few feet from my terrestrial body, but my mind had been isolated completely. I was as alone as someone could be. I let my mind continue to wander. It felt as though I had been in the chamber for hours at this point. Although I had planned to spend this time planning some sort of creative endeavor, the great American novel perhaps, I found my mind repeatedly coming back to my current predicament. Obsessively, I thought about my body and the container that currently housed it. The numbing medicine must have been truly quite something. I couldn't feel the slightest wisp of breath passing through my nasal cavities or the rumble of my stomach. It was then that a pair of intertwining thoughts collided in my mind. A. Could I be dead? B. No, of course not. That would be ridiculous. I knew how I had ended up here. I knew that I had signed up to engage in an experiment that would put me in this exact predicament. But I must admit, I no longer felt very alive. Without my body or the surrounding world as a reference point, it felt as though I had no assurance that I still existed. My thoughts began dueling with one another. A. Surely I'm not dead. This is exactly what the experiment was supposed to do. B. If you're not dead, then why can't you feel anything? Why can't you feel your breath or saliva or anything? A. But I know I'm not dead because I'm thinking right now. B. What does that mean? A. You know? I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. A smarter man could have told you who said that, but I was left with just that proclamation from an unknown source as the only assurance that I was alive. As long as I was thinking, I was still alive. I began to picture myself floating through a void in space. The image was clear in front of my eyes. My body lay flat, my arms stiff, as I rocketed past stars and unfamiliar planets. I watched my body weave past asteroids and through planetary rings. I felt the warmth of the sun on my body and the cold ice of the frozen planets on my skin. Except I didn't really feel those things. I had to remind myself of that. I was starting to imagine feelings that weren't really there. I wasn't sure how much I should try to avoid these feelings or just embrace them for the duration of the experiment. Just another question to ponder, I suppose. There came a time when I realized that I had been in sensory deprivation for a long time. Since I had not been counting, it was impossible to know how long. It felt like it had been days already. Had it been days already? That was a worrying thought. In a timeless void, 3 days stretched on like an endless millennium. They had assured me that I would only be inside the machine for 3 days. But how could I know for sure? Once I was inside, I had no way of getting out. They could keep me for as long as they wanted to. Maybe that was their plan all along. A. How could they get away with that? B. Who knows what all those liability waivers I signed said? I stopped reading them after the third or fourth one. Maybe I agreed to this. A. You're being crazy. B. I don't know if I'm being crazy or not. I don't know how long I've been in here. So count. That was right. I had one way to tell how long I had been inside the machine. Counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on and on. I counted to 60. That was a minute. And then I counted another minute, and another, and another, and another. I just kept going and going. I never lost focus on the task at hand. Then I hit 1,000 minutes. Technically, 1,000 minutes was only a little more than 16 and a half hours. Certainly not the 3-day period I was supposed to be inside the machine. But that was 16 and a half hours on top of all the time I had already spent thinking about my life and dreaming about floating through space. Surely I had spent longer thinking to myself than I had counting. I tried to guess how long I had been in the machine. It felt like it had been more than 3 days. I just kept trying to tell myself that I would be let out of the machine soon. I let my mind drift off again. My body was once again floating through space. I watched it drift farther and farther out into an endless void of darkness. The planets and suns shrunk into oblivion until I was truly, deeply alone. In the black abyss, a creeping feeling of cold began to set in. Its biting sting spread up my legs and torso to my face. My naked skin turned a pale blue and began to harden into a crystalline husk. As my body drifted farther into darkness, I watched the surface of my stomach crack and chip. Slowly, chunks of my body began to break off and float into the darkness. With each expelled scrap of flesh, a new wave of pain cascaded through my body. I found myself trying to grab onto my frozen body and put it back together, but my arms and legs were so cold that I could not budge. I tried to scream, but my tongue had swelled so large that it filled my crumbling, frigid mouth. All at once, my body exploded into an array of jagged, bloody shards of ice. The pain was indescribable. Then I was, again, alone in the darkness, bodiless. Without lungs to expel the panic breaths I was so desperate to create. I had to keep telling myself, it wasn't real. I'm still alive. My body is still here, somewhere. But God, didn't it feel real? B, but it wasn't real. A, real or not, didn't it hurt? B, yes. A, are you scared? B, yes. A, wait, do you hear that? I listened through ears that were a million miles away. A voice, not mine own, burst into my head. Its bristly accent was familiar. Hello, this is Dr. Monison. I'm contacting you again via the small speakers contained within the helmet of the exoskeleton. I am proud to announce that you have successfully completed 3 days within the machine. I felt my alarm melt quickly into relief. I tried to smile, to little avail. At this juncture, we would like to update you as to the status of our experiment. The data we're getting from your brain scans is proving incredibly useful. The medical implications are numerous. We have contacted our institutional review board and obtained permission to extend the experiment indefinitely. This is, of course, in accordance with the liability waivers that you've signed previously. The machine should be able to keep you alive for a few more weeks until your body becomes unable to support it any further. Do not worry. $5,000 will nonetheless be credited into your account. Thank you for your contribution. Your sacrifice will save lives. I tried to scream. I tried to flail my arms in protest and push back against the doctor's words, but my screams were silent and my arms no longer part of me. I felt a deep, echoing hole of dread grow inside me. Yet I would never truly feel anything again. I would die in this chamber. It would take days, and those days would feel like months, and those months would be torture. I again saw myself floating in an immeasurable darkness. There were no stars or planets. There was only my body, unequivocally alone, arguably alive, but inevitably dead. I stopped counting the seconds and just let myself float. My mind wandered again, this time for much longer. I dreamt of my childhood and of a future I would never get to lead. I made an imaginary bucket list and felt remorse for the boxes I had not yet checked. I held conversations in my head between old friends and lovers. And sometimes, I didn't think at all. Sometimes I disappeared from existence altogether. But then I felt it. I felt something. I couldn't tell what it was at first. It had been so long since I felt something that I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or not. It was my big toe. My big toe on my right foot. Somehow, someway, it still had feeling. Not a lot of feeling. It felt like when you sit on your hand, and it becomes almost, but not quite numb. Like it was being massaged by a set of pins and needles. I moved the toe around, the little that I could, to try to understand how this feeling had come back. Then I felt it. A tiny prick. The slightest droplet of pain against my big toe, something sharp. An IV needle. It must have become dislodged somehow. Maybe one of those lab coat-wearing schmucks tripped over it or something. All I knew was that I could feel again. I suddenly felt like I had been born again. Like I had died and risen from the ashes. This needle must have been one of the needles that was supposed to deliver the numbing chemical into my body. Somehow, it got dislodged, and now I had just a little feeling in my toe. Unfortunately, my big toe was hardly the vestige of my body most suited to orchestrate my grand escape. But still, I felt immeasurable happiness, because I had a secret weapon on my side. Time. There's an old adage that goes, if you give a monkey a typewriter and infinite time, he will eventually write the complete works of Shakespeare. Similarly, with a partially numb big toe and infinite time to think, I could craft my grand escape. My big toe was too weak to push open the exoskeleton. Despite my straining, I was unable to reach any other cords to pull them out. All I could reach was the IV needle that had already been pulled out. And with that IV needle, I hatched my plan. I scraped my toe across it. It stung, but I knew it would do the trick. I knew that I had forced those stupid scientists' hands. My efforts had made a cut in my toe skin, and now I knew I was going to be okay. They only had two options. Let me bleed out, in which case I would at least be free from this hell, or let me out of the chamber, at least long enough to reattach the IV. Either way, my plan was foolproof. Either way, I was going to be free, at least for a moment. It only took them a few minutes to notice what I had done. This is Dr. Monison again, communicating via the tiny speaker in the helmet of the exoskeleton. It seems you have managed to injure yourself inside the exoskeleton. After some discussion, we have elected to pause the experiment and correct the error. Stand by. The exoskeleton will be opening shortly. The light that soon flooded my eyes all but blinded me. As the machine opened, I bathed in the sounds of its electronic thunks and whirs, and the conversation of the men around me. The quick tug as needles and tube were removed from me felt better than any touch I had ever experienced. They let me out. I was free. My body was numb for hours. The medicine prevented me from making any movements at all. During that time, the scientists left me in the exoskeleton as they went over data and bandaged my big toe. I tried to listen to everything they were saying, but found myself unable to concentrate. The bright lights above me burned my eyes, which had grown accustomed to perfect darkness. As the drugs slowly left my body, a dull ache developed in my joints. After a while, my body was hauled out of the exoskeleton by a team of the lab coats. I felt a dressing gown slip on over my head. I was plopped into a wheelchair. Still unable to move, I listened to the roll of metal wheels as they pushed that chair deeper and deeper into their lab. Explain again about when you were floating through space. What was the sensation like? Please let me go. I can't. You know that. The data we were getting from you is too important. Lives are at stake. And besides that, we can't risk you going to the police. You will be going back in the machine. This conversation had been going on for about an hour, in the tiny interrogation room set up somewhere in the research group's massive underground lab. Although I had regained enough feeling to speak, I still found movement quite difficult. It was clear that as soon as I outlived my usefulness to the lab coats, I was going to be placed back inside the machine until my bodily demise. The data that the scientists had gained so far was so useful that they had no problem holding me against my will. As I sat in that tiny metal room, tied to cold folding chair, clad only in a thin dressing gown, I considered my fate. For $5,000, I had sold away the rest of my life. My only respite now was that I could delay going back in the machine for as long as I resisted Dr. Monison's questioning. But I knew I was just delaying the inevitable. I stared down at my big toe, now wrapped in a bandage. Somehow it had not dawned on me that, even if I got out of the machine, the scientists were unlikely to let me out of the building alive. Not after they decided to imprison me until I died, anyway. What if I don't answer the questions? The data we intend to receive from those questions is critical and could save lives. But if we cannot elicit it, then the information received from the exoskeleton will be sufficient. If you won't answer, we will return you to the machine now. So it didn't matter. I was already doomed. I might as well delay for as long as I could. Fine, ask me what you want to ask me. I answered hundreds of questions, most of them multiple times. It took hours. The scientists barely listened to my words. There was a recorder placed in the room with me. I'm sure someone would dig through my answers later, but for now, the conversation seemed to be mostly for posterity's sake. At some point though, I realized something. The drugs had completely left my body. I could, theoretically, move again. For now, I was tied to a chair. But they couldn't keep me tied up if they wanted me to go back into the machine. And from that thought, I came up with a plan. I knew I would only have a few seconds. I knew I couldn't run immediately, or they would catch me. I would have to convince them I was resigned to my fate. When the questioning concluded, I found myself being hauled back into the chamber containing the exoskeleton. Perhaps assuming that I would flee otherwise, the scientists kept me tied up during transit. But the ties came off when it was time to put me in the machine. They stripped off my nightgown and lifted me inside the machine. I let my body go limp as they did, feigning the same numbness that had, until recently, restricted my movement. As I laid down in the rubber interior of the exoskeleton, Dr. Monison spoke to me through a loudspeaker in the ceiling. I am sorry we have to part again. Your answers will be invaluable for future research. I know it may seem now like we are villains, but the research we're obtaining is invaluable. It will save lives someday. You are doing a valuable service to the world. As his speech ended, his researchers again approached to fill my body with needles and tubes. I was eager to make my escape, but I held tight. They would have to believe I was unable to move. I felt pinpricks in my right arm. I was already being loaded up with the numbing agent. My time was going to be short. As some of the lab coats approached me on my left side to insert another IV, I launched myself upward so I was standing inside the machine. Surprised by my sudden motion, the scientists on my left recoiled. I felt a sharp pain in my right arm as the IVs and tubes held tight against the strain of my sudden motion. The room exploded into panic. Men rushed at me from all sides. I felt my body moving as if on its own volition. My left arm reached towards my right and ripped a series of cords and needles out of my body. Blood sprayed onto the machine. My right arm fell loosely to my side. I propelled myself out of the machine and onto the floor, naked as the day I was born. The numbing agent had disabled my right arm, but most of my body was fine. I sprinted towards the door through which I had entered the lab, what now seemed like a millennium ago. I did not dare turn back to see if I was being chased. All I could do was run. As I pushed the door open, I saw a long hallway that led to a set of alternating staircases. Staircases that I had walked up and down several times while preparing for the experiment. Stairs that I had always assumed I would one day walk up for the last time. I pushed my body as hard as I could. I ran with my right arm dangling limp beside me until I reached the stairs. Behind me, the angered yells of men and the thud of their footsteps remained consistent. I knew that if they caught me, it was game over. When I reached the stairs, I practically jumped up the entire first flight. As I turned to climb the next flight, I saw that only 2 men had kept pace with me. Suddenly, I was filled with hope. Perhaps I could outrun them all. Then I would go to the police and get the chance to put this whole operation under the microscope. As soon as I got to the top of that second flight of stairs and through the exit doors, I would be free. My hopes were dashed as soon as I reached the top of the stairs. At least 15 men guarded the building's exit. Clearly, my escape had been a contingency for which the facility was prepared. As the men approached behind me and in front of me, I knew there was only one way I could go. The alternating staircases continued past the first floor, all the way up to the roof. I kept running, staircase after staircase, my aching body protesting each step, my dead arm banging against stair railings and walls as I made my way up those stairs. The sounds of angry men filling my ears as I took step after step after step. Soon I was on the last staircase. A ladder, hanging from the ceiling, led up to a hatch on the roof of the building. This was it. I was going to see the outside world again. I didn't know where I was going to go once I got up there, but I knew I was free. I jumped onto the ladder and pulled myself up, about 6 feet into the air. When I reached the top, I pushed on the hatch. It was heavy and barely budged. I strained against the hatch for a moment, then felt a tight grip on my ankle. One of the men had caught up. He had wrapped his cold hand around my leg and was beginning to yank me off the ladder. I turned slightly and saw it was Dr. Monison. His eyes were red and as large as saucers. It was like looking into the eyes of the devil himself. I reacted purely out of instinct. My grip on the ladder tightened, and I swung my free foot at the doctor's face. As my heel collided with his jaw, sending teeth and blood flying in all directions, I couldn't help but smile at the feeling. It hurt like you wouldn't believe, but it felt damned good to feel something. Dr. Monison relaxed his grip. I pushed upwards again, and the hatch gave way. I clambered upwards onto the flat roof of the building. A thin layer of gravel covered the rooftop. The sharp stones poked at my bare feet, but I kept moving. I ran to the edge of the roof and looked out into the city. A beautiful horizon of skyscrapers and stars filled my view. I felt the cold breeze against my bare skin. The voices of the men behind me barely registered as I climbed onto the edge of the roof. I must have been a sight to the people walking by on the sidewalk below. A naked man standing on the edge of a building staring at the horizon as if he had never seen one before. Please come down from there. You don't have to go back in the machine. We just need you to come down. It was Dr. Monison again. His voice was hard to understand now that he was short a few teeth. I turned away from the horizon to look at him. He was surrounded on all sides by other men in lab coats. I knew at that moment that I had no real choices left. Could I believe Dr. Monison that he wouldn't put me back in the machine? Probably not, but I had no chance to escape at this point. There were too many of them for me to get away. Just as one of the researchers reached out to grab me, I took a step backward. As my body tumbled down to the earth below, I found myself laughing. It was just like when I was in the machine. My body was floating once again. The cold air numbed my body, and once again, I couldn't feel a thing. Just before I struck the ground, I heard the sound of church bells ringing out. Hallelujah! I figured I must be on my way to heaven. No heaven came. Instead, I found myself in complete darkness, feeling nothing, seeing nothing, simply ruminating on my previous actions. Is this what death is like? In answer to my question, I heard a familiar voice. Hello, this is Dr. Monison. I am speaking to you once again via a small speaker contained within the helmet of the exoskeleton. You have successfully completed your 3 days within the exoskeleton. Had I not still been pumped full of numbing drugs, I would have wept. We are currently in the process of opening the machine. At that point, we will perform a physical assessment. I'm sure you are anxious to leave. I can assure you we will move as quickly as possible to make that happen. Thank you so much for your assistance with this project. It has been invaluable. 3 days. I had been in that machine for exactly 3 days. It didn't click for me until they were pulling me out of the machine. There was no bandage on my big toe, no needle near my foot on which I could have cut myself. The facility was nothing but accommodating in the hours after the experiment terminated. They provided me with a comfortable place to rest while the remainder of the drugs left my system. Although they asked questions about my experience, they were not hostile when I refused to speak. The researchers were happy to answer my questions about the experience, happy to tell me it was all in my head. In the days following the experiment, Dr. Monison made sure that I was provided with any mental health resources that I requested. He connected me with a therapist that I have been seeing for several weeks. The therapist has prescribed me an antidepressant, which I take twice a day. I have returned to my normal life. My rent is paid. I'm seeing someone new. I got a new job at another book publishing company. It's like all my fantasies have come true. But no matter how long I talk to the therapist and no matter how many pills I take, I can't get the machine out of my head. I can't stop thinking about how those 3 days seem to extend indefinitely. A. But you're out of the machine. Your 3 days are up. B. Yes, but... A. But what? B. I was out of the machine once before. A, but that wasn't real. B, but it felt real. A, does this feel real? B, I don't know anymore. Could 3 days feel even longer? Could I imagine a therapist, a job, a better life? I don't know. Sometimes I close my eyes and I become too afraid to open them because I'm worried that when I do, I will see only darkness. I'm scared I will find myself still floating, motionless, amongst those imaginary stars. Story. I've been squatting in a condemned high-rise. These are the rules I follow to stay safe. I'm not homeless. I have a home. I just don't own it. But it's mine and I work to keep it. Every city has its fair share of abandoned buildings to squat in, but usually you gotta deal with either cops or shitty neighbors. The Andale high-rise has neither. Police stay away, so do the locals. As a stranger from out of town, I stumbled across the place on my first night in the city and thought it a little strange that a 28-story tower block had been left to rot, every window black, every light in the courtyard smashed. No cars in the lot, no booth for a guard, not even barbed wire on the fence. Barely half a mile from a playground filled with shouting drunken teenagers, but none of them strayed in the direction of Andale. No fires or music or bottles hurtling through the air. It was silent. Inside, I found that the lobby had been torn to shit. Double doors ripped open and left that way for what looked like years. Easy access for the curious, but I was the only one there. Most of the first story had collapsed. Waterlogged ceiling tiles turned to mulch by shitty British weather. I know water is invasive, but it had practically fucking colonized the place, so bad algae was growing up the walls. Even the elevator shaft was flooded. My own reflection looking back at me as I peered through brackish water and caught a glimpse of the old rusted carriage just a few feet below. I couldn't help but think about standing on top of it, waist high, and reaching down to pull open the emergency hatch. Only natural to wonder what was down there. Little metal box soaking in pitch black water for years and years. I thought about pressing the button, calling it up and seeing the elevator rise in spite of all logic, an image I still think of from time to time. Meanwhile, the empty shaft loomed above, cables whistling in the wind. I've learned not to linger by it. If you look up, you'll sometimes see something ducking out of the way, pulling its head through the doors before you get a good look. It finds it awfully funny, even tries to make a game out of it, like peekaboo. Play too much though and it starts to pop up elsewhere. Any open door becomes an invitation. Sent more than a few people running for their lives in the middle of the night, but bad news for them. That thing is more than free to leave this place if it's part of a game. If you ask about Andale, most people just shrug or laugh. Kids will talk about it same way they talk about any haunted house. Difference is no one dares anyone to go up there. No one uses it to get pissed or high. No one sneaks into the basement to have a risky little fuck. No one hides their stashes there. It has all the hallmarks of your classic urban legend, only people actually stay away. They'll laugh and joke and tell scary stories, but they treat the soil it's on like it houses a radioactive leak. And the council, I'm surprised they haven't knocked it down, but they, out of everyone in the city, have the most to lose by talking about it. They built it in the mid-50s as government housing. Only a lot of the young mothers who moved in there found their children's health taking a turn for the worse. Started with newborns. Babies that wouldn't wake after a peaceful night's sleep. The kind of deaths that got written off as either negligence or abuse. Screaming teenage girls hauled off to prison on the words of doctors who didn't give a shit. It's always the mother's fault in some people's eyes. And these girls had no one to stand up for them. 2 in the first year, 4 in the next. And they kept on coming for every year until it closed. Wasn't until 1982 that someone traced the source of deaths to tainted water storage on the roof, toxic metals leaching into the supply. Not enough to kill an adult, but bad news for anyone with weak immune systems. 38 women had been imprisoned by then. Another 23 had killed themselves before they could be sentenced. And those are just the ones accounted for. Not all the deaths were from the water. Andale has a way of being bad for any child's health, no matter the circumstance. More than a few toddlers starved to death as their parents rotted in the tub from an overdose. Even more were lost when they found their parents' stash. little bodies racked with agonizing fits as their panicked mothers screamed for help. One tripped down the elevator shaft because the doors opened as if the carriage was right there. And those are the ones who were found. Plenty more went missing, written off as runaways. In the end, Andale's reputation as a cursed place got so bad, the only way out was to shut the whole thing down, board it up, erase it from the records, pretend it never happened and just forget. But Andale kept on killing even after the doors were officially shut. If anything, it only got nastier. Talked to one cop who told me he found a guy dead from sepsis on the 6th floor, a couple years after the place was shut down. No one could fucking believe it. They reckon this guy scratched himself on a nail and caught gangrene like it was the 1800s, never went to the hospital. Just laid there and died, slowly and painfully, as the infection spread, but not before he took every last bit of furniture in the room and shoved it against the door. Strange enough on its own, but it was the flag he'd made out of his own clothes that freaked everyone out. He'd scrawled help on it, like he wanted to get someone's attention down below, even though the lock was on his side. He could have left any time he wanted. Cop I spoke to said he was there when they kicked the door down. Still remembers the look in dead man's eyes. He was glaring at the door 2 days after he'd passed, white-knuckled fists gripping a blanket that smelled sickly sweet from all that infection. There were others, too. Lots of people falling, many of them without a good reason. Got so bad they bricked the roof door, but by the time I arrived, someone had cleared it all away with a sledgehammer. I still don't hang out up there, not after I first went up and saw pale fingers gripping the ledge, like someone was hanging off it and holding on for dear life. I reckon a lot of people see something like that and think a person needs their help. They go rushing over to offer a hand. But when I saw it, something about those grimy nails set alarm bells off in my head. Fingers looked all wrong. So I took my coat off and used a broom handle to move it closer to the ledge. Sure enough, those ugly hands snatched at the coat and ripped it out of my hands, sending it hurtling to the parking lot below. I've thought about taking a closer look from time to time, but I got a thing about heights and could never bring myself to investigate it much further. You'd think I'd leave, but it's my home. I own it as much as it owns me. People even refer to me as the caretaker now, like they forgot I wasn't always here. Police treat me the same, can you believe that? Any reports of a break-in, and they call me on my number to go take a look, like I'm some sort of official. Only other guy who was here as long as me was the philosopher. I don't know his name, just call him that because of the books he left behind. He came here back when the block was still just a place to live, and he stuck around for a few years after its closure. Lots of notebooks in his flat, thousands of pages talking about child sacrifice made to gods who don't like being named, along with pictures of strange things frozen in ice and medical photos that look fake. At first I thought he came to document the curse. He has dozens of books just recording all the strange things he saw, like birds with too many wings or milk that turned to clotted blood in the bottle. But after going through everything he owned, I found letters to a wife who died in childbirth. He kept her death certificate way at the back of an old-looking box filled with the letters he'd kept writing her long after the date. Another box, just a row over, had the letters she'd written back. Awful things scrawled on random scraps, shit and blood for ink. He dated them himself, and sometimes wrote notes about how they came to him. Delivered by a rat that was cannibalized in front of me. Pulled by my dentist from a cavity in my mouth. Written in the web of a spider with 13 legs. Anyway, he gives away the real reason he moved to Andale in one of the letters. Says that Andale was the key to helping her, that he was weeks away from figuring out how to open the door. Told his wife he'd bring her back. Told her he knew how. I've never figured out where he went next, or what happened to him, but his apartment was locked when I found it, and likely would have stayed that way if the key hadn't turned up in my inside pocket on the first morning. Now I live in his old place. It's safe in there. He's written things on the wall that keep everything well behaved. Symbols that I don't understand, but which are easy to trace, so that's what I do. I go over them every couple of months, and so far they've kept me safe and sane. Because you do need protection in Andale. I don't know when in its history the curse went from something mundane to something very real and very dark. It wasn't all just bad luck or poverty, not by the end and certainly not anymore. You can't just go strolling around Andale, certainly not at night. It's dangerous. For one thing, it attracts a constant rotation of the deeply unwell who are likely to attack on sight if you're lucky. They usually turn up dead in the halls come morning, although sometimes it's just bits of them that I come across. Strips of skin floating on the brackish water that floods the basement stairwell, or bloodied fingernails embedded in the ceiling plaster. Weirdest one was a single tooth in a light bulb, bloody gum still attached to the root, the glass all around it somehow intact. Many of them come here with business, something a little like the philosophers, rituals, bargains, things like that. It's not a good idea to interrupt them, or to give them even the slightest hint you might be a problem. Every night I lock my door and wait for Andale's business to finish, and come morning, I do a sweep, floor by floor, and clean up whatever's left of the tower block's strange pilgrims. Most of the rituals don't look real to me. In fact, I reckon a lot of people who come here just end up as victims of something or someone else. There are a lot of reasons to stay out of Andale at night, and most of its visitors strike me as a little naive. Most of what I see looks like it got stolen from a bad death metal album. I once found a book called Satanism and Witchcraft in the 21st Century. It's hard to imagine that the secret inner workings of the universe can be found in something with an ISBN number and 3,000 Amazon reviews. Of course, not all attempts at exploiting Andale's energy are so hackneyed. I had one guy turn up at my door and pay me $3,000 in cash just to show him the darkest corner in the building. I wasn't sure what he meant at first. Thought he meant light and shadow. Sort of, he replied when I explained this to him. Darkness like that can be part of it, but I'm looking for a corner. Has to be a right angle or more acute. Ideally, more acute. You understand that term, right? He'd seemed arrogant, and that last sentence confirmed as much. Good-looking guy in his late 20s, nice suit. Looked like the stereotypical banker, acted like one too. Plenty of places like that, I said. Lots of funny rooms in Andale. People trying to make the most of limited space. Sometimes the walls meet at tight angles, sure. But I don't know what you mean about dark. There's the basement. It's flooded. Can't think of anywhere darker than that. He bit his lip and hesitated for a second or two, as if he was actually contemplating it. Not a bad suggestion, actually. But no, too difficult to reach. And I don't just mean dark, as in the absence of light. I mean dark like under the bed. Dark like that one chip in a wall that leads to a hollow space between the bricks, and as a child you can't help but wonder what lives there. Somewhere that just inexplicably feels like it's not got as much of God's attention on it as everywhere else. I thought about this for a second. His words were vague, but damn, if I didn't know what he meant. A corner? I asked. Has to be an acute corner? He nodded. I think I know the place, I said, and he smiled like real creep. I took him to a flat on the 8th floor. It was run down like everywhere else, but there was still enough of its old furniture lying around. You can pull open random drawers in there and still see the cutlery people once used. There's even an old analog television on an old stand. You can perch on what's left of the sofa and stare at that television and get the feeling you knew the people who lived there once. Run your thumb over the dials on the toaster, the handle of the fridge, or the yellowing plastic of a light switch, and feel an aching loss that creeps up on you out of nowhere. Look up and you'll see that the light fixture has been torn out of the ceiling, like someone had tried swinging from it. Not a big place, by the way. 3 rooms, a bedroom with a double bed all rumpled up, a living room/kitchen, and a tiny little spare room that looked like it once would have been used for storage, or a washing machine maybe, if you were single and childless. A slither of space, a triangle carved out of whatever room was left over when other more important walls had been put up. That sofa I mentioned, the television, they were all placed, so whoever was sat down could always keep an eye on that room and its contents. You see they'd put a cot inside and it's still there, bluebottle flies circling overhead. You can't see inside the cot, not unless you went in and actually pulled the blankets out, but it's been decades and no one has managed it yet. It's dark behind those old blankets, a heavy shadow that dissuades a closer look, like there's something in there no one needs to see, and it spent a long time sat there eating what little light there was. Even with a window in that room, daylight doesn't really filter down. Perfect, the businessman said when he saw it. He gazed around the flat, one detail at a time, his head pausing for a moment, and a smile creeping across his face as he laid his eyes on the broken light fixture. And the cot, the sight of it, The flies that still circled above faded Winnie the Pooh blankets. It made the breath catch in his throat. "Oh, this is good," he told me. "Dark like under the bed. You've earned that money." I could have had a dozen men sweep this place, and they wouldn't have understood the brief as well as you have. "Thank you," I replied, even if that wasn't really how I felt. Quietly, the man sat down and began to unpack his leather satchel. No pentagrams to be found, although he did unpack 7 strange-looking candles. He caught me looking at them and smiled. "Homemade," he said. "Each one shaped by my hands. I'm not a good artist, but it's the effort that counts. Took forever to rend the wax. Of course, that was the easy part. The hard part was getting the fat to make it. Did you know there can be a surprisingly high level of security around a hospital's medical waste department?" "I didn't," I replied, as he took out some flimsy bits of wood and a few small nails. He oh so carefully began to nail the splinters of wood together into what looked like random shapes. "Oh well," he sighed after a few quiet moments, his fingers nimbly gripping the tiny hammer as he tapped away. Already he'd put together at least 6 of the strange little wooden polygons, and with each new one I felt a strange sensation. "Would you like to stay and watch?" he asked. "Absolutely not," I answered. He stopped tapping and smiled once more. "Oh, you're clever," he said. "That's the correct answer, by the way. And if I'm to respect it, I should inform you that now is the safest time to leave." I made my way to the exit just as he lit the first candles, but not before I looked towards the cot one last time. I was surprised to see a hollow blackness that extended beyond the doorway, like a curtain had been draped across it, only there was depth to it that drew the eye. The businessman paid it no attention, but after a few more seconds he eventually looked up at me expectantly. "Can I ask what is it you want?" I said. "Everyone who comes here, I don't get the sense it ever works out for them." "I'm looking for a new kind of afterlife," he replied. "Do you need one?" "We all need one," he said with a wry chuckle. "But only those of us willing to take a few risks will get a better deal. Everyone else," he grimaced, "it's worth the bother. But look who I'm speaking to." He looked to the darkness that enveloped the doorway. Shapes could be seen floating past. "You should leave now," he said. I pulled the door shut, and noticing that the sun was rapidly setting, ran to my apartment, where I knew the walls would keep me safe. When I returned the next day, the man's satchel was still where I'd last seen it, propped against one arm of the sofa. The candles had burned down to the very end of the wicks and left a lingering smell that's still there all these years later. And of the man himself, well in the room with the cot, which still has bluebottle flies orbiting overhead there, is now a shadow burned into the wall. It's blurry and diffused, but vaguely recognizable as a man on his knees, his head pressed to the floor in a gesture of supplication. I've known it to occasionally move, to turn its head and look towards me, at which my temples throb, my ears pop, and a darkness begins to encroach upon the edges of my vision. I never exactly considered that flat to be Disneyland before, but now I avoid it like the plague. Still, it could be worse. Not every ritual ends so cleanly, and at times I've had to personally intervene, something I hate bitterly. If people want to go poking around in the universe's undercarriage, that's their business. It's one thing if I've got to sweep what's left of them up afterwards, but at least that's a one-and-done job. Sometimes it isn't so clean. One guy turned up and told me he'd be a new resident, my neighbor, and we'd get to know each other. A bumbling old man with an upper-class accent and the look of a professor who was down on his luck. He set up in the room next to mine, and no matter how little I spoke to him, he never really got the hint and kept trying to act like a good friend. Few times I did initiate conversation it was to tell him the place he'd chosen didn't have much in the way of protection. He pointed to some funny little rashes and told me they were his protection. Over the next few weeks I'd bump into him from time to time, always on his hands and knees, scraping some dank corner or moldy pile of bumpy growths. He collected fungi, told me on the first day, and I'd often see him wiping his samples onto petri dishes that he whispered quiet words to whenever he thought I wasn't around. I don't think he was sane, but he probably wasn't completely barmy, because he lived long enough to get a sense of Andadale and only come out in the day. Meanwhile, his apartment filled up with a growing collection of chittering terrariums and pickle jars, their specimens hidden by murky fluids. All over, he planted and cultivated strange mushrooms and molds. Encouraged them to soak up the darkness of Andale, and set them to grow in the rife conditions he'd cultivated. Towards the end, his living room had mushrooms growing out the walls, plaster crumbling beneath microbial armies until there was only concrete and rebar. And even then, mold continued to grow and thrive. A few times I peered in and found him feeding meat to the frilly growths that exploded out of the old furniture. During this time, the symbols on our shared wall would often grow hot, and I found myself having to replace them on a nearly daily basis as he tinkered away on the other side. I asked him once or twice to tone it down. "This is important work," he growled, an unseen darkness creeping into his voice. "I'm not some ditzy crackhead trying to summon the Baphomet. I'm not looking to get high. This is science, progress. That is what I am working towards." "Yeah, well, your progress is trying to eat its way into my flat. Can you ask it to stop?" He stopped, frozen mid-gesture, like I'd said something either profoundly stupid or insightful, or likely a bit of both. He looked at the rashes on his arms that had, by now, started to sprout some of their own strange fruit. When he finally spoke again, it was sly, like a lecherous old man propositioning a nurse. "This fungi," he said, "they had samples of it in the university for 30 years. Can you imagine? They never even realized what they had until I found it and unlocked its potential. Now I've finally found the source, and I can do things no one else thought possible." This entire time, my thesis has depended upon the idea that the fungus has a capacity for information processing way beyond anything we've considered before. And your idea is a good one, you know? Asking it just might be an option. He scuttled off without another word, and for the next few days, he set about the building like a furious little honeybee in spring, poking and prodding, setting trap after trap and cleaning them vigorously of any rats or mice he caught. When I did my morning sweeps, I'd find him hovering over Andale's latest victims, scraping what was left of them into transparent bags for his own purposes. "Don't mind me," he'd mutter. "It's worthless to you, but these poor souls could help me achieve great things." This persisted for another month. He no longer scraped mold or mushrooms off old apartments. He became interested only in meat, and by the time it came to an end, I can say confidently that I have never smelled anything worse than the prickly, musty odor that wafted out from under his locked door. It became so bad that I began to wonder if I might have to ask for police help and have him removed when, finally, he simply disappeared from Andale's halls. One morning he was there, annoyingly shooing me out of the way as he lowered jars into the flooded basement. And then the next he was gone, and Andale's halls were silent once more. But that didn't mean he had moved out. Far from it, actually. It took 2 days before I decided to just go ahead and break his door down. I kicked at it with a short, sharp blow, only to find my leg immediately disappeared through wood that had the texture of sodden cardboard. I freed my foot and tried a different tactic, grabbing the handle and pulling so hard that it simply popped right out of the rancid wooden frame. Free to move, the door swung open with an eerie creak and fetid air, hot and damp, blew out of the room. Inside I found that the man's specimens had gone wild. Terrariums had shattered, their contents spilling outwards. Frogs as large as footballs glared at me from behind furry fronds, and insects with human eyes scuttled away before the amphibians could snatch them up. In one corner, rats had built a hive out of old cardboard, their backs covered with fungal growths that resembled human fingers and other appendages. In another corner, something that looked a little like a black rubber sheet slapped furiously at passing vermin, and it took me a few seconds to realize it was a slime mold. When it finally caught something, it dragged the strange creature squealing into the dark corner where it grew and constricted around its meal like a fist. I stared at it horrified until one by one black orbs unveiled itself from within the strange mass, and I realized it had eyes to stare right back at me. It was a cacophony of God, awful terror, so gripping that it kept me from hearing the muffled noise of a human struggling to speak. Eventually it did reach my ears, and I used my torch to light up the far wall, without having to actually step inside. I found the scientist half-grown into the wall. Algae and moss coated him head to toe so that he was no longer recognizable, but I had to assume it could be no one else. Wide eyes glared at me with terror and pain, as nasty little critters nibbled away at what was left of his shins. Meanwhile, strange tendrils probed at his ears and head, never resting for a moment. He kept trying to speak, but the algal growths kept driving their way into his mouth until, one by one, they pushed too far and something snapped. His eyes went wider still, his squeals became hysterical, and his jaw slowly slid further down his chest until it hit the floor with a sodden thump. Finally made contact? I asked. An awful idea if I've heard one. What would a mushroom have to say even in the best of circumstances, let alone one that was grown in the ruins of Andale? I can only assume you never got around to telling it to stay off my wall, did you? No, you probably had your own reason for doing all of this, and that's what took priority. That made me wonder what it was he'd asked for. As the thought entered my head, I took a quick look around and tried to see if anything particular stood out to me. Something was growing on the sofa that looked strangely human-shaped. It might have been just my imagination, but in the dark, it seemed to turn towards me. Meanwhile, the scientist continued to shiver in agony, his eyes focused on me and begging for help. "I'll see what I can do," I said before slamming the door. Something about that strange pile on the sofa had deeply unsettled me. I put the word out, asked for a gun, but got a crossbow instead a few days later. A nervous-looking 16-year-old boy ferried it to my door. I was surprised he'd entered the building, but who knows who'd ordered him to do so. I've acquired a strange sort of respect amongst the locals, and it comes in handy. This boy looked like he would have stamped on my head and robbed me blind any other day, but when he spoke to me, he did so with more respect than I ever imagined I deserved. I thanked him, took the crossbow, spent an afternoon practicing with it, and then used it to kill the scientist the next morning. Took a few hits, but in the end one thumped into his forehead and shut down his whimpered moans. I didn't see anything on the sofa this time, at least not anything human-shaped, which I was thankful for. After that, it was a simple case of calling the police and beginning a long chain of events that ended with half a dozen men in hazmat suits spraying the room with noxious chemicals. For a while there, I'd been worried that they'd find a corpse and ask questions, but by the time anyone actually entered the room, there was nothing left of the scientist save a splotch on the floor. I never did figure out exactly what it was he was after, although it is not uncommon for my morning sweep to turn up a body, or part of, covered in fungal growths. And I have been known to occasionally catch glimpses of a strange person lowering themselves into the floodwater of the elevator shaft. Of course, I might just be making connections that aren't really there. All sorts of things live in that water. The entire level is flooded, and if something was down there, it'd have free reign over quite a large space. It's a strange world down there. I should know on account of one visitor who gave me a very bad time. I'll call him the fisherman since he came to Andale because of the flooded basement. Saw a photo that's been circulating around for a while now, if you know where to look. God knows who took it and how, but it shows the flooded stairwell leading to the basement, and beneath the brackish surface is a hand that's all out of proportion. Fingers splayed with perfect symmetry like a starfish. It is reaching up out of the depths and resting gently on the third step below the water. When I first met him, he was sitting happily with his feet over the edge of the flooded shaft, water up to his knees, with a rod and line set up beside him. It was quite a surprise at first, seeing him there with a little fly fishing hat. A chubby but healthy-looking man in his 40s with an egg mayo sandwich in one hand and a phone playing Candy Crush in the other. I called out to him as I approached because, in my experience, startling someone in Andale is bad for your health, no matter how sane the visitor appears. He looked up when I caught his attention and smiled amiably. "Hello?" he waved with his sandwich. "You're the caretaker?" "Yes, I am," I answered. "And you are?" "Just a tourist," he smiled. "Care to join me?" The sun had risen only moments ago. "You weren't here when it was dark, were you?" I asked, more than a little suspicious. "Oh no, you've only just caught me. Been here barely 10 minutes before you showed up. I was told you'd be willing to help in exchange for a small fee." "What sort of help?" I asked. "Oh, just give me a nudge if any of the lines start moving," he said while pointing to a rod he'd set up beside the basement stairs. The door was propped open, and the line led down into the darkness below, water gently lapping just out of sight. Another line had been set up in a corner of the lobby where the floor had been torn away, revealing a hole straight down into the basement. I can't keep an eye on them all at once, you see. I have bells ready, but, well, 2 heads are better than 1. "What is it exactly you're hoping to catch down there?" I asked. "Are you familiar with the primordial ocean?" he said, The abyssal waters that God split into light and dark, all that. It's not a physical location per se, but it does connect to certain bodies of water depending on the time and place. Last recorded manifestation was in a glass of old whiskey underneath a forgotten bar in Mexico City. Some poor fellow knocked it over and didn't notice until the following day when half the bar was suddenly underwater. Quickly rectified, but some of the things swimming in that water were something else, and all from at the bottom of a glass no wider than my wrist. Imagine what we can do with this, he said while gesturing at water by his feet. You think there could be fish alive down there? I asked. At least, he replied. I'd be willing to pay for any reliable information, of course. Do you have any idea what might be down there? Not really, I shrugged. But I'd guess it wants to be left alone. You might be right there, he said while looking at his other rods. I didn't exactly put down any old lure, you know. He reached into his pocket and took out a strange tuft of fur and ivory, holding it up for me to squint at. A tooth from a man who drowned in the sea. A drone collected it off a shipwreck near the Norwegian coast. The fur is actually red algae that was found growing on his bones. I have plenty of these and, well, other things that might appeal to what's on the other side. My research was thorough and expensive. Come on, take a seat. Flat fee, 1,000. Just sit here until the sun starts to set. I just have to sit? I asked. And let me know if you hear or see anything. I groaned and sat beside him, folding my legs instead of letting them dangle in the water below. Despite my reticence, we stayed like that for several hours. He'd brought lots of food, good homemade stuff, along with plenty of cold beer. We sat there and spoke very little, but we did eat and drink a tremendous amount. Not the kind of thing I do normally, but I was being paid to be there, and I didn't really have anywhere else to be. It was, all in told, a very pleasant afternoon, until I fell asleep. When I awoke, it was with a terrible gasp. My chest was tight like something had been sitting on it, and judging from the terrible giggling and scampering feet I heard running off into the darkness, it might not have been just a feeling. Already panic was setting in as my eyes darted to the open doors and saw that the moon was out and had been for hours. I fumbled for my torch, and turning it on, saw that there was no sign of the fisherman. All his stuff had been left behind, yet all that remained of him was his hat that still floated on the water. Even as I watched, a smooth, glistening shape curled beneath the water and plucked it off the surface. I recoiled and crawled away from it as fast as I could. This was bad. I knew deep in my heart I'd never been as at risk I was in that moment. The open doors that led outside were tempting, but just beside them were the stairs that led downwards, and I swore I could hear something approaching. I couldn't help but picture the fungal man I'd seen in the scientist's flat. Then again, that basement was huge, and who knows what lay down there. I decided to go for the stairs. The entire time my heart was in my chest. I had never been caught outside my room at night, not since my first night when I'd slept in the lobby with my coat pulled over me. You don't get lucky twice, not with Andale, so I knew had to be careful. I had to be quiet. My only hope was to go unnoticed. I took to stealth, climbing each floor in perfect silence, hiding in well-known spots at the slightest hint of footsteps, human or otherwise. Andale comes alive at night. Whispered mutterings from strange children who descend from air vents, living there for God knows how long. Other times I saw apparitions, including one, a toddler, the sight of whom made my stomach growl with an insatiable hunger that hurt just to contemplate. She stared at me with pleading eyes as I slunk away from her open door. I might have been tempted to help her were it not for the sight of the moon peering through her translucent image. And yet, despite all this, I somehow made it to the 14th floor alive. Only it was there, right at the final hurdle, so close to safety, that I came across something out of my worst nightmare. A woman stood outside my apartment door, silent, pale, dirt-covered fingernails. It was all too often I'd open my door and find muddy impressions on the floor made by a woman's bare feet. Now I knew who left them every night. I couldn't see her face from where I hid, but something about her seemed profoundly familiar. When she finally turned towards me, I remembered. I recognized her, even though most of her face was missing. It was the philosopher's wife. He had succeeded, it seemed. But I couldn't imagine at what god-awful price, because the woman who stared at me had clearly weathered some years in the grave. It was only the poor lighting and her long hair that had covered up just how bad a state she was in, A lipless grin stared back at me below sunken cheekbones and hollow eye sockets. And yet, I could tell that in another life she had been beautiful, which only made the sight all the more gut-wrenching. "My darling," she whispered, and there was something about her voice that I found hard to stay sane in the face of. I don't know why. Over a decade in that place, and I'd borne witness to living nightmares. But it was this walking corpse that pushed me to my limits. The inescapable feeling of loss weighed me down, and without realizing it, I found myself taking steps towards her, even as my knees buckled. By the time I reached her, I was crawling until I could clutch her grimy, icy leg. And that was the last thing I remember before I woke up in my bed the following morning. Everything seemed normal, so completely mundane that I could have written the whole thing off as a bad nightmare. But there were footprints leading from my bed to the door. And later on, I found the fisherman's things much as he left them. Although when I finally reeled his lines in, I found the lures gone and replaced with bits and pieces of the man who'd first set them up. I threw it all into the water below and decided it would be best to forget him. Every now and again, of course, I can't help but check my peephole at night. I never did before that, but now I do. I see her every single time. She looks sad. Hurts me to think of her out there. It ought to be terrifying, but it's more like someone's ripped out my stomach and heart and let all my insides fall out the bottom. Each time I see her, I wonder what exactly was it he did to bring her back. He leaves only one hint. A final letter, I think. It's not like he dated them. In it, he says he would give everything to have her in his arms once more. Not only his life, but everything he's already lived. Every sunset, every good dream, every nightmare, every victory, every loss. Every little memory that makes him who he is. He'd give it all just to save her. Sometimes I wonder about him, figuring we'd probably be about the same age. I'd like to think back and imagine what it would have been like for the two of us to meet as young men. But for some reason, whenever I try to remember what my life was like before I came to this city, before I woke up with that coat pulled over me, well, I don't know. It's just hard, that's all. It's almost like there's nothing there, like something reached in and took all the years away. I guess it's just one of those things I'm better off not dwelling on. Mysteries are everywhere, and some may be closer than you think. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next mystery. See you in the next story.